Welcome to Whispers of History, where forgotten tales, strange events, and mysterious moments from the past come alive. One whisper at a time. Subscribe, relax, and let the past whisper you to sleep. In 1907, off the coast of Greenland, a supply ship caught sight of a man waving from atop an iceberg. He stood alone, wind tearing at his coat, but calm, as if he had expected them. They did not know then they were witnessing the beginning of a legend. Leif Magnusson declared the iceberg's sovereign land. "Welcome," he said, "to the kingdom of Frista." He had maps, flags, stamps. A nation on ice. The crew thought it was a joke. But it was only the beginning. By the third week, the air had changed. It wasn't just colder, it was quieter. As if even the wind had grown cautious. The crew gathered in the dim mess hall, bowls of steaming stew in their hands, trying to ignore the way the walls of the ship groaned more often now. Snow fell steady outside, tapping lightly against the frosted portholes. Niels the cook ladled thick fish broth from a dented pot. A veteran of Arctic voyages, he had sailed through storms that had split hulls in two. But tonight, his face was pale and thoughtful, his eyes tracking something far beyond the iron walls. "The ice doesn't move like it used to," he said softly, not looking at anyone. "It listens now." Some chuckled, others exchanged glances. Jules leaned back in his chair, amused. "What's it listening for, Nils?" "Our spoons." But Nils didn't respond with a smile. He only stirred his pot again, slower this time. "It's listening, and learning." The words hung strangely in the air, heavier than expected. Captain Bram, always grounded in order and steel, didn't comment. But later that night, he kept his boots on, and his coat draped nearby. That quiet unease, the kind a soldier recognizes but never names, had settled into their bones. Even the sled dogs were restless. One refused to lie down. Another whimpered toward the darkness behind the storeroom door. And though the fire was well fed, its flame flickered blue. No one spoke of it the next morning. But Nils, while sharpening a knife, whispered something to himself. "It remembers." It began with lights. Not the northern auroras, no, not those drifting ribbons of green and violet that danced silently across the polar sky. These were different. Pulses. Soft, steady. Rising from beneath the snow. The first to notice was Anders, one of the younger deckhands, who stood night watch near the cargo ropes. At first, he thought he'd fallen asleep on his feet. But then it came again, a gentle blue glow, blooming up through the cracks in the ice like breath through fabric. He called no one. He simply stared, as if something inside him remembered the shape of it. By morning, the crew gathered around the strange circle left in the snow, a faint ring of melted frost no wider than a dining table. In its center, ice crystals formed a perfect spiral. The compass Jules carried swung wildly in every direction, spinning like a child's toy. That night, things shifted again. One of the crew, Emil, quiet, dependable, awoke gasping. Said he'd seen his mother's face in the frost on the wall. Heard her whispering from beneath the deck. "She was younger," he kept saying. "She was calling me from the ice." He begged to turn back. No one knew what to say. By dawn, Emil was gone. No signs of struggle. No cry. Just, gone. His tracks led away from the ship, in a perfect circle that looped back to where it began. Nothing else. Only snow. And silence. The storm broke just before dawn. Winds that had screamed for 3 days suddenly hushed, as if something unseen had drawn a curtain across the sky. The snowfall slowed, then stopped. And for the first time in weeks, the horizon opened wide. What lay beyond it made the crew forget to breathe. A vast wall of ice stretched out before them, not rough and jagged like the glaciers they had passed, but smooth, sculpted, impossibly precise. There were domes. Towers. Arches so delicate they seemed to float in the cold air. Frozen bridges arced over deep, crystalline canyons, their spans catching the pale light like glass spun from the breath of giants. It was not a ruin. It was not a mirage. It was a city. A kingdom. Carved directly into the glacier's belly. Leif Magnusson stepped forward first. His boots crunched softly across the frost, echoing in the stillness like footsteps in a cathedral. He removed his fur-lined hood, letting the cold sting his ears, and whispered one word, half prayer, half recognition, Frista. Then, slowly, he sank to one knee. No one mocked him. No one spoke. The silence that hung over that place was not empty. It was aware. As though the city itself had been waiting for them, measuring them. Edda gripped her scarf tightly. Jules held his breath. Even the dogs whimpered, then fell completely still. A forgotten kingdom slept before them. And somewhere inside, it listened. It was Luca who first heard it, a metallic groan from somewhere deep below, barely perceptible beneath their boots. It wasn't the sharp crack of ice shifting under pressure, nor the low creaks of the Njord's aging hull. No, this sound was older. Heavier. Like something ancient stretching in its sleep. The ship had stilled. The snow had ceased. And for a rare moment, the sky above was clear, a pale sheet of silver with no wind to disturb it. Edda was the first to descend from the Njord, her boots crunching gently onto the frozen surface. She tested each step with care, her breath a plume in the quiet air. Luca followed silently, mittened hand gripping a frayed rope leash tied around one of the huskies. The dog did not bark. It only stared ahead, ears twitching. The ice stretched out in every direction, endless and smooth like ancient glass. But not far from the ship loomed a strange silhouette, the half-sunken hull of another vessel, older, darker. Its mast jutted out like a broken finger pointing at the sky. "This one's been here a long time," Edda murmured. The wind sighed low, like a whisper from beneath the ice. And then, he appeared. Not approaching. Not arriving. Just there. At the edge of the wreck. A man. He wore layered robes, fur-lined and yellowed with age. A glowing lantern hung from his hand. But no shadow followed him. None at all. And when he turned, slowly, his pale eyes met theirs with a wordless voice that echoed in their minds, "Frista." Then, mist. And he was gone. The city of Frista was silent, not abandoned, not dead, but waiting. At its center stood a solitary tower, carved from deep blue ice that shimmered like glass. It rose high above the other structures, its silhouette like a frozen spire pointing toward the muted sun. Near its peak, a great iron bell hung suspended in frost. The ropes had long since frozen stiff, coated in thick rime. No bird circled. No wind stirred. And yet, as the sun reached its highest point in the pale sky, the bell moved. Once. It gave no warning, no creak. Just a single, low toll, deep and sorrowful, like the groan of a lost memory echoing through the air. It rolled over the city in waves, bouncing off towers and bridges, slipping between alleys of frost and glass. The crew stopped in place. Even the dogs froze mid-step. Luca dropped to his knees. He wasn't frightened. His eyes shimmered with something else, awe, recognition, maybe even sadness. He looked up at the bell and whispered, "It's calling someone home." No one answered. The sound slowly faded into silence. And far below their feet, beneath the city, something shifted. Not loud, just enough to feel. They had wandered through endless chambers of frost and silence, rooms encased in ice so thick it dulled even the sound of their own footsteps. But then, they found one that felt different. The door had no lock, no carvings, just a smooth arch leading into stillness. Inside, the air was warm. Not in any mechanical sense. There were no pipes, no fire, no glow of artificial light. And yet the room breathed. The frost had receded from the walls, and the stone, smooth and pale, pulsed faintly with heat. Etta stepped in first, the hair on her arms rising. The room shimmered at her presence. She reached out and touched the wall, fingers brushing its surface like turning the page of a book. And then it happened. A ripple passed through the chamber, not loud, but felt, like stepping into a dream halfway through. The cold vanished. A breeze stirred. The floor beneath her became grass, soft and green. Somewhere, far off, a woman's voice called gently, "Leaf." It was sunlight. Real sunlight. Then, just as quickly, gone. The frost returned. The shimmer stilled. Etta staggered back, eyes wide. "This place remembers," she whispered. And Luca, standing behind her, quietly nodded. The hall was vast, larger than any they had yet discovered. It stretched into shadow, its ceiling lost in the darkness above, held aloft by twisted columns of frozen stone. Once, it may have been a place of celebration. Or perhaps judgment. It was impossible to tell. At its center stood a single table, long, low, carved from one seamless slab of dark ice. It gleamed faintly in the flickering torchlight, but it wasn't the table's surface that held their gaze. It was what had been embedded into it. Teeth, dozens at first, then hundreds, human and animal alike, arranged in spirals and rows along the length of the table. Some were polished and white. Others yellowed, cracked, even broken. They weren't scattered. They were set deliberately. Patterned. Ritualized. Leaf approached slowly, his fingers trailing along the air just above the ice. There were runes, too, carved between the spirals, ancient and sharp-edged. He began to read them aloud. Just a phrase or two, rough translations from Old Norse. Feast of Witnesses. Bone memory. To speak what was swallowed. The torches dimmed, then, all at once, extinguished. For several heartbeats, the room was silent. Breathless. Black. Then, one by one, the flames relit themselves. No one touched them. Etta stared at the table, her voice a whisper. It was never meant for food. Jules stood very still. No. It was for listening. They left the room in silence. None looked back. Behind them, the teeth seemed to shine a little brighter. They followed a corridor chiseled into the glacier's heart, walls smooth as glass and tinged with veins of violet and blue. The deeper they ventured, the more silent the world became. Even their footsteps, once crisp against stone and snow, faded into hush. At last, they reached a circular chamber, vast and cavernous, lit by shafts of cold light filtering down from above through natural ice chimneys. And at its center, raised upon a dais of dark crystal, stood the throne. It was not regal. It was not beautiful. It was ancient, rough-hewn and jagged, carved from black ice that shimmered faintly with something beneath the surface, as if veins of memory pulsed through it still. Not decoration. Not luxury. It was a seat of waiting. Of watching. Of endurance. Bram stepped forward, careful not to let his boots echo. It was made for someone, he said quietly. Leaf stood beside him, his expression unreadable. He didn't reach for the throne. Didn't sit. He simply stared. The others held back, a respectful circle forming without words. In the silence, Luca took out a pencil and began to sketch. His hands moved slowly, almost reverently. Etta turned to Jules. "It's not just a relic," she murmured. "It's listening." Leaf leaned forward slightly, his lips parting. A whisper, so faint that even those closest could not hear. It wasn't a throne built for a king. It was built for the one who returned. And still, after centuries, it waited. It was Bram who first noticed the glint, a delicate shimmer peeking from behind a curtain of icicles clinging to the cliff wall. At first, it looked like nothing at all, just another bend in the glacier, another trick of the light. But something tugged at him. A memory, maybe. A feeling. He brushed aside the ice with gloved hands, revealing a smooth stone arch, hidden beneath layers of frost. The others joined him in silence, chiseling carefully with small tools, until an opening revealed itself. What they found was not a cavern. It was a corridor, long, narrow, and perfectly straight. Its walls were inlaid with carvings that seemed to pulse faintly under torchlight. Symbols none of them could read. Stars. Spirals. Crowned figures walking in procession. They followed the hall until it opened into a massive chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow. Rows of stone shelves stretched in every direction, each one heavy with frozen volumes. Some were wrapped in leather, others stitched with seal hide, a few etched into long slabs of dark slate. Not a speck of dust. Not a single sign of decay. It wasn't a library. It was a vault of memory. Leaf brushed frost from one massive book resting on a pedestal of ice. The title, written in a script even he barely understood, translated roughly to, "That which came before wind." Jules stood stunned. They were writing history, before we even named it. Luca wandered to a side table and unrolled a scroll. His own sketch stared back at him, the city, the crown, the light. This place had seen them coming. Not far from the library, beyond a narrow stone arch glazed with frozen mist, they discovered another chamber, this one shaped like a bull carved into the glacier's ribs. Smooth walls sloped upward into a dome, and the air inside was still, unnaturally still. In the center of the room was a hollow, an oval depression where a single slab of thick ice rested like an altar. Luca approached first, drawn by something he couldn't name. The others followed, cautious but curious. The ice wasn't like the rest of the glacier. It was clearer, somehow alive with color beneath its surface, slow ripples of blue and amber flickering just beneath the frost, like distant lightning caught in a bottle. Etta brushed her hand across the top. And it awakened. Not with sound, but with image. Inside the ice, shapes began to move, faint and ghostly. A village, no, a city. Alive. Lights in the towers. People walking beneath glowing arches. Children laughing as snow fell gently from above. And then, a wave of darkness sweeping in from the edge. A storm. A silence. A shuddering of light. Leaf stumbled backward. The image vanished. "I saw it," Jules whispered. "All of it." Luca reached forward and rested his palm on the ice. His breath caught. "They remember," he said softly. "The ice remembers." And for just a second, the ripple returned, and the boy's reflection in the ice was not his own. It was older. And it wore a crown. They discovered the vault by accident. A gust of wind had swept through one of the lower halls, revealing a crack in the glacial wall. Thin, almost imperceptible. But Jules, ever alert, paused mid-step and held up his lantern. The flame danced differently there, as if pulled inward. Behind the crack, a hidden door. It took an hour to melt through the thick frost, and when the stone finally gave way with a low groan, the air that escaped was warmer, and strange. Not foul, not musty, but charged. Like the breath of a storm trapped underground. Inside lay a narrow chamber, no wider than a corridor, but every surface, walls, ceiling, even floor, was covered in engraved metal sheets. Copper, brass, silver etched with curling lines of script. Thousands of them. Layer upon layer. The moment Leaf crossed the threshold, he froze. So did Etta. Because in that silence, something spoke. Not in language, but in thought. Like echoes curled inside the brain. Not voices, but feelings. Memories that didn't belong to them. Bram gripped the hilt of his knife, breathing heavy. Jules backed out without a word. Only Luca stepped forward. He ran his fingers over a bronze panel shaped like a crown above a door, then turned to the others. "They're not whispers," he said. "They're questions." Behind him, the room pulsed faintly. A memory, perhaps, waiting for an answer. But none of them were ready to give it. Not yet. They were exploring the southern wing of the glacier city when they came upon it, a narrow stairwell winding downward into darkness. It spiraled like a shell, each step sheathed in thin ice, and no sound accompanied their descent. No wind. No drip of water. Not even the creak of boots on stone. It was Luca who noticed it first. He dropped a metal spoon, an old habit to test depth, and waited for the clang. Nothing. The spoon hit the ground. They saw it. But it made no sound. At the bottom of the stair, they found a door carved from bone-colored stone, untouched by frost. Leaf pressed against it, and it opened without resistance. Inside was a perfectly square chamber, maybe 20 feet across. Blank walls. No windows. No ceiling vents. Just stillness. Leaf clapped his hands once. No echo. He stomped. Nothing. Etta whispered, "It's swallowing sound." Jules reached for his recorder, but it failed to turn on. Every piece of metal on his belt seemed to quiver slightly, like magnets repelled at odd angles. In the center of the room sat a small pedestal with a single object atop it, a circular stone, smooth and black, engraved with something like a spiral. Luca reached for it. "Wait," Leaf warned, but the boy's fingers brushed it lightly. Suddenly, silence inside them. Their thoughts, their memories, all seemed to still for one moment. Not erased, but paused. Then it passed. Luca stepped back. "It doesn't want to be remembered," he said quietly. And no one disagreed. They found it beyond a collapsed corridor, where the ceiling had cracked and let in drifts of powdered snow. It looked like nothing more than rubble at first, a dead end. But Luca wandered close to the far wall, running his gloved hands across the frost. "Here," he said, pointing. Beneath the snow, the stone had been carved into an archway, now sealed shut with ice and silence. It took hours to melt through. What waited on the other side was green. Or at least, it once had been. A domed chamber, impossibly vast, opened before them. Its ceiling had fractured long ago, letting shafts of pale blue light spill across what remained of a garden. Trees stood frozen mid-bloom, their limbs encased in glittering ice. Vines curled around crystal trellises. What might once have been flowers lay preserved in translucent frost, still vibrant, still reaching. The air inside was heavy with quiet. Etta stepped carefully over frozen roots. "This was alive," she said. "And not long ago." Near the center stood a bench carved from glacier glass. Leaf brushed it clean and sat. For the first time since arriving in Frista, he looked tired. Luca wandered to a frozen bush and touched a leaf. The ice melted beneath his fingers, just a little, revealing green beneath. "This place remembers warmth," he whispered. A single petal broke free and drifted down like snow. Jules caught it in his hand. "It's still dreaming of spring," he said. And they let the silence settle once more. They were sleeping when it began. A low hum, soft at first, barely there, vibrated through the walls of their camp. At first, they thought it was the groaning of the glacier, the natural shifting of ancient ice under pressure. But this was different. It came in waves. Rhythmic. Almost melodic. Etta stirred from her bedroll, eyes narrowing. She held her breath. There it was again. A song, so faint it might have been imagined. She roused the others without speaking, and soon they stood in silence outside their tent, torches flickering in the pale blue night. The sound came from beneath, not around them, but below, deep under the glacier's surface. "It's inside the ice," Jules whispered, pressing his ear to the ground. They followed it. Through narrow passageways and dripping tunnels, deeper than they'd ever ventured. The song grew clearer, though still wordless, not a melody crafted by instruments, but one shaped by memory. Or longing. At last, they reached a cavern where the glacier thinned into a massive wall of sheer, luminous blue. Behind it, shadows. Movement. Shapes drifting, slow and distant, like whales beneath the ocean's surface. And the song, pulsing in time with the glow of the ice. Luca stepped forward and placed his hand against the wall. The song surged for a moment, louder, clearer, as if responding. "They're not singing," he said softly. "They're remembering." Leaf closed his eyes. And for one long minute, they simply listened. It began with footsteps in fresh snow, prints that hadn't been there the night before. They led from nowhere, winding toward the outskirts of Frista's frostbitten ruins. Leaf was the first to notice, crouching beside them as the wind picked up. "Too deep for one of us," he muttered. "Too heavy." They followed the trail. Past the frozen bell tower, down a corridor of broken arches, and out to the city's edge, where jagged cliffs dropped into darkness. And there, standing at the threshold of it all, was a man. Or something that resembled one. He wore a long coat of stitched furs, layered with frost and torn in places. His face was hidden by a hood rimmed with ice crystals, and yet, somehow, they knew he was watching them. He held no weapons. No gear. No pack. Only a tall, slender staff carved with the same spiraled crown they'd seen throughout the city. It glowed faintly, not with fire, but with memory. Etta called out, her voice steady, "Who are you?" The figure tilted his head slowly, as if considering the question. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he lifted the staff and pointed it behind them, toward the heart of Frista. He spoke no words. But in their minds came the whisper, "Not all who fled have died." Luca stepped forward. The man turned without a sound and vanished over the cliff's edge, not falling, but descending, as if walking down unseen stairs into the abyss. They did not follow. Not yet. The ground changed beneath their feet. As they ventured beyond the stranger's footprints and deeper into the city's silent quarters, the texture of the ice shifted, harder, smoother, polished like glass. And embedded within it, something pale. Etta knelt, brushing away the frost. Bones. Hundreds of them, not scattered, but arranged in elegant spirals and circles, embedded beneath the surface as if part of the architecture itself. Some were large, perhaps from caribou or seals. Others, unmistakably human. They followed the path, a winding trail of frozen remains, until they reached a great open plaza ringed by ivory spires. At its center lay a single ribcage, immense, cracked, and open like a broken harp. Leaf approached it carefully, lantern raised. "It's part of the city," he murmured. "Like a monument." Then Luca stepped forward. He reached into his coat and pulled out a thin metal rod, a tuning fork Jules had given him weeks ago. He struck it gently against a shard of nearby stone and held it over the ribcage. The note sang softly. And the bones answered. A low harmonic hum rose from the ice, delicate, mournful. The bones were vibrating, singing in reply, as if stirred by memory. The air thrummed gently, and for a moment, time bent. Jules dropped his journal. "I hear names," he whispered. Etta stepped back. "This is an ossuary. A choir of the dead." Luca didn't speak. He simply listened, and the melody played on, ancient and unfinished, echoing softly through the frost. They discovered it by accident, a wall that breathed. It stood in the oldest part of Frista, half buried beneath a collapsed tower whose stones had long since turned blue from the cold. The crew had taken shelter nearby during a sudden snow squall, huddling beneath bent beams and frostbitten arches. That's when Luca noticed the wall. Unlike the rest of the city's stone, pitted, ancient, weathered by centuries of ice, this one shimmered. Smooth. Seamless. And in its center, a door. Or rather, a doorframe. There was no knob, no hinge, no seam to push against. Just a tall arch of polished black stone embedded in the glacier wall, perfectly oval, rimmed with runes that seemed to move ever so slightly when you looked away. Jules ran his fingers over the arch. No latch. No lock. It's not meant to open by force. Leaf stared at the runes, brow furrowed. It's waiting for something. Etta lit a torch and stepped closer. The flames dimmed, then flared, then stilled entirely. No wind. No air. Luca approached last. He reached into his coat and pulled out a sketch, one he hadn't shown the others. Drawn days before. A perfect match. The frame. The runes. The stillness. He pressed the drawing to the stone. For a second, nothing. Then the wall breathed. A slow exhale of air poured outward, warm and ancient. The runes pulsed. The air shimmered. But the door did not open. Not yet. Some doors, it seemed, didn't open to touch, but to memory. And memory had to be earned. The dream came to all of them that night. Not shared in speech, but mirrored in silence, each member of the crew waking in the still hours before dawn, breathing heavily, staring into the dark as though they had all glimpsed the same impossible truth. In the dream, there was light beneath the ice. Not fire. Not moonlight. Something older, pulsing like a heartbeat, deep in the glacier's belly. It came not from above, but below, beneath the bones, the towers, the memory-vaulted walls. Beneath the city itself. Luca was the first to act. Wordlessly, he rose and led them to the eastern ridge, the highest point of Frista, where the wind sang louder and the frost was bitterest. And there, between two broken spires, they saw it, a fissure in the glacier's heart. Thin, vertical, and glowing faintly from within. Etta and Leaf lowered ropes. Bram anchored the descent. Jules hesitated, but followed. One by one, they climbed down into the crack, ice groaning around them with each breath. At the bottom, stillness. And embedded in the frozen wall, as if grown there like crystal, was a crown. Not golden. Not bejeweled, but carved from glacial obsidian, impossibly black, etched with sigils that mirrored those seen in the memory vault and on Luca's sketches. It hovered within the ice like a trapped thought, untouched by time. Leaf reached out, his voice a whisper. It wasn't forged. Etta nodded slowly. It was remembered. None dared touch it. Instead, they stared, awed, unsettled, uncertain. Because something beneath the ice had worn that crown once. And might one day return to claim it. The sculpture stood at the far end of a forgotten promenade, flanked by fractured columns and tangled vines encased in ice. At first, they thought it merely decoration, another relic in a city littered with memory. But as the snow cleared from its base, it revealed far more. It was not a king, nor a warrior. Not a hero cast in victory. It was a man asleep. Reclined on a bed of sculpted stone, arms crossed over his chest, head tilted slightly as though dreaming. His expression was peaceful, too peaceful. And the detail was uncanny. Every hair, every wrinkle, the fold of his garments, carved with a tenderness that no chisel could have managed alone. Luca stood close, mesmerized. "He's listening," he whispered. At the statue's feet were dozens of tablets. Not for worship, but for storytelling. Etched in spirals and symbols were passages that spoke of dreams that shaped mountains, thoughts that bent rivers, and memories that lasted longer than life. Leaf read aloud a phrase in Old Norse: "He dreamed the city, and the city remembered him." Jules brushed snow from a nearby stone and frowned. "This isn't a tribute, it's a record. He wasn't carved. He became this." Etta stepped closer and laid a hand on the stone man's arm. Warmth. Not heat, but something deeper. A hum beneath her palm. "He's not dead," she said quietly. "He's resting. Or waiting." None of them spoke for a long time. And somewhere beneath them, The glacier sighed. They found the mirror in a narrow corridor hidden behind a warped stone door, the kind that only opens if you're not looking for it. The passage was barely wide enough to pass through, choked with ice and brittle vines that cracked like glass with every step. Jules walked ahead, lantern held high, light trembling against the ancient walls. At the end of the hall, embedded into a slab of curved obsidian, was a mirror, but it did not reflect, not the light, not their faces, not even the flame that flickered inches from its surface. It was as if the mirror swallowed all things visible and turned them inward, into memory. Etta stepped close and tilted her head. Nothing, but Luca. Luca saw something, he gasped, stumbling back. What did you see? Leaf asked gently. Myself, Luca whispered. But. Not me now. Me before. Before the ship. Before Frista. He reached out, fingertips brushing the surface, and for an instant, the mirror shimmered. It showed not just reflections, but versions. Possibilities. Faces they had worn in forgotten lives, moments lost to time but stored like seeds. Leaf approached, heart thudding, but when he looked, he saw only fog. The mirror showed truth, but only to those who had forgotten. Etta touched it too, briefly. Her expression tightened. My mother's voice, she murmured. But not her words. Jules refused to look. He set the lantern down and turned away. Some mirrors are not meant to show who you are, only what you've left behind. It happened just after dusk. The team had set camp beside a collapsed aqueduct, its once flowing channels now locked in glacial stillness. The sky was unusually clear, a dome of pale lavender streaked with fading amber. No clouds. No wind. Only silence. Then came the first flicker. Not auroras, they knew those well by now. This was different. A pulse. A shimmer. Words. Not spoken, written. Across the sky, letters began to form. Not in ink, but in light. Pale silver symbols blooming like frost patterns and fading just as quickly. They danced along the horizon, always shifting, never lingering long enough to fully read. Jules was the first to scramble for his notebook, sketching wildly, muttering. They're Old Norse, no, older. Fragments. Runes I've never seen. Luca stared upward, lips slightly parted. They're questions, he said. What kind of questions? Etta asked. Luca pointed. One symbol glowed briefly above the mountain's edge. That one asked, do you remember your first promise? The next, what would you leave behind to keep it? The sky was testing them. Not with riddles meant to be solved, but remembered. Leaf stood still, heart heavy. This place is alive, he said quietly. And it's listening. The sky shimmered one last time before the symbols dissolved into ordinary starlight. And just before they faded completely, Luca whispered the final phrase he saw, what is forgotten is not gone. Only waiting to be heard. And the night held its breath. The path twisted downward into a frozen ravine, where the wind fell silent and the air turned still, heavy, almost reverent. There was no sound but their breath, no color but blue and bone white, and then they saw it, the tree. It stood alone at the center of the basin, roots wrapped around slabs of half-buried stone, its trunk gnarled and silvered with ice. But what caught their eyes was the flame. It danced along the branches, pale gold and flickering, a fire that gave no warmth, cast no shadow, and did not burn the bark it touched. Each flame shimmered like a memory, curling upward in slow spirals before vanishing into the still air. It's not fire, Etta said, her voice hushed. It's remembering. Leaf approached slowly, eyes wide. The branches. They move with the light. Luca stepped close and held out a hand. One of the flickering lights floated down to meet him, resting just above his palm. He didn't flinch, instead, he closed his eyes, and saw a village he had never visited. A woman's laughter. Snow falling on rooftops shaped like waves. When the light vanished, tears clung to his lashes. "This tree stores moments," he whispered. "Memories that don't belong to anyone anymore." Jules reached for his journal but stopped. Some things, he realized, weren't meant to be written, only felt. The crew stood in silence around the tree that burned without heat. Each of them lit, for a moment, by memories not their own, and far above, the sky pulsed gently, as if watching. It was Leaf who noticed it first, a hallway lined with carved arches, each one older than the last, not in age, but in style. The further they walked, the more primitive the markings became. Modern symbols faded into runes. Runes into scratches. Scratches into nothing but smooth, untouched stone, and then the door, low and narrow, half covered by snowdrift. Behind it, a room, simple. Square. No furniture. No markings. Just walls of pale stone and a floor dusted with thin frost. But something was different about the air, lighter, warmer, tinged with a strange scent, pine sap and wildflowers. Luca stepped inside first, the frost beneath his boots melted. The corners brightened. Ever so slightly. And as the others followed, the room began to change, not suddenly, but with every passing second, the stone softened. Cracks vanished. The frost receded. Moss bloomed faintly in corners where there had been only cold. Etta brushed a wall and gasped. "It's smoother now." Jules turned in a slow circle. "It's like the room is going backward." They stood quietly as the space shifted around them. The walls, once rigid and worn, now glowed faintly with a gentle pulse, not electric, but organic, like something breathing. Then came the voice. Soft. Young. Wordless, a lullaby without a language, and in the center of the room, something began to form, not physically, but emotionally. A memory coalescing from nothing. Leaf whispered, "It's someone's first dream." They didn't know whose. Perhaps not even the city did, but for that moment, they stood inside a space that remembered being born. They found it in a shallow alcove near the edge of Frista's outermost ring, a place where the wind never reached and frost clung thick to every surface. The alcove had once been part of a larger hall, now collapsed, leaving only fragments of archways and sculpted panels that seemed to whisper forgotten names. The mask sat alone on a pedestal of blackened stone, carved from ivory, or something very like it. The mask bore a face that was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. Its features were delicate, almost sorrowful, and around the eyes, fine etchings curled outward like frozen tears. Jules approached carefully, lantern held aloft. The mask glinted, "It's weeping," he murmured. Tiny crystals fell from the mask's eyes, not tears, but flecks of snow, endlessly forming and drifting downward like delicate confessions. Leaf reached toward it, then stopped. "It feels private," he said. "Like we've walked into someone else's memory." Luca stepped forward, transfixed. As he peered into the hollow eyes of the mask, snow began to fall gently inside the alcove, but only there. It spiraled slowly, impossibly, in the still air. The boy closed his eyes. He saw flashes, arguments whispered in ancient languages, a crown being shattered, someone turning away from a great throne. A decision, terrible and necessary. He stepped back, shaken. "It remembers regret," he said softly. Etta covered the mask with a scrap of cloth from her pack. Some sorrow, she believed, deserved to rest, and behind them, the snow within the alcove stopped falling, but the mask still wept. They had nearly missed it, a narrow break in the ice, half hidden behind a wall of frost-streaked ruins, where a gust of warm air sighed outward like an exhale. It was Luca who paused, tilting his head. "It's breathing," he said, and though the others didn't understand what he meant, they followed him through. The tunnel was long, narrow, sloping downward in a spiral that tightened the deeper they went. The walls were smooth, not carved but shaped, by intention or time, none could tell. And all along the stone, faint ridges pulsed with gentle rhythm, as if the glacier itself had a heartbeat, no wind. No sound but their own footsteps, and breath. Always breath. As though something vast and unseen slumbered nearby. Dreaming in cycles of inhale and exhale, Leaf ran his hand along the wall. It was warm. Not hot, but alive. Jules lit a small torch, and the flame didn't flicker. It swayed in time with the breathing. They descended slowly, reverently. At a bend in the tunnel, they found ancient markings, not written, but sung. Echoes embedded in the walls. Humming tones that shifted when they passed, vibrating in their bones, the tunnel. Remembers voices, Etta said, her tone barely above a whisper. When they reached the lowest chamber, the floor was covered in soft frost, but their footprints disappeared behind them almost instantly, erased, not by snow, but by will, as if the tunnel allowed them through, but would not allow memory to linger. And when they turned to leave, Luca looked back just once. It's not a passage, he whispered. It's a lung. And something deep below was still breathing. They stumbled upon the chamber by accident. While exploring a forgotten corridor beneath Frista's central tower, the floor gave way beneath Nils's boots, dropping him into darkness. When they lowered ropes and lanterns, they found him standing unharmed, inside a vaulted room unlike any they'd seen. It was a scriptorium. But there were no scribes, just desks of polished ice, frozen quills still upright in inkwells, and parchment stacked neatly as if waiting to be used, except one. One scroll lay unrolled on the largest desk, words appearing across it in real time, not inked by hand, but summoned from within, like breath exhaled onto paper. Luca stepped close. It's writing what we say. He whispered. Leaf tested it. Frista, he said aloud, and the word appeared, curling across the parchment in dark, deliberate strokes, but the scroll didn't merely transcribe, it interpreted. When Jules spoke of his dream the night before, a storm that never touched the ground, the scroll wrote, he remembers the wind that never wanted to be. It's poetic, Jules muttered. Etta dared to place her hand on the desk. The scroll twitched. And then, slowly, it wrote something none of them had said, you carry her voice like a scar. Etta backed away, breath caught in her throat. The ink had memory, not just of words, but of hearts. They left the room quietly. And the scroll continued to write in their absence, as though the city itself had decided their story was worth recording, and far above, the ice cracked, not in warning, but as punctuation. They had heard it for days, faint, distant, like a drumbeat muffled by miles of snow. The deeper they ventured into Frista's belly, the louder it became. Not a sound that echoed, but a pressure that built behind the eyes, in the chest. A presence. A promise. Eventually, they reached the cavern. The entrance was jagged, unnatural, not carved or shaped by human hands. As though the glacier had torn itself open long ago and never healed. Cold wind hissed from the opening, but it was not bitter. It was charged, like the air before lightning. They stepped inside. The space beneath the city was vast, a dome of ice and stone so immense it swallowed their lanternlight. But they could see it. In the far distance, a storm, frozen in place, not a storm of wind and snow, but of motion. A cyclone of ice particles, suspended mid-surge, spiraling slowly, like breath held for centuries. Lightning arced silently inside it, trapped in an endless loop. It's waiting, Luca whispered. For what? Etta asked. Leaf's face was pale. For permission. This was no natural formation. This was a vault. A sealed tempest, caged beneath the kingdom like a last resort, or a forgotten god, and as they stood in silence, the storm twitched, not much. Just enough. A single snowflake broke loose, spinning downward through the still air and melting before it touched the ground. Something had noticed them. Something had stirred. Jules closed his notebook. We shouldn't stay. And for once, no one disagreed. They found it inside a chamber carved like a chapel, not for prayer, but for remembrance. Arched ceilings glittered with veins of silver and frost. Stained glass windows, frozen in hue, glowed softly without sun. And at the center of the room, atop a raised dais of ice, sat the crown. It was not golden, it was forged from something older, a weave of obsidian and glacier crystal, jagged in form, as if shaped by the hand of a storm. It pulsed faintly, the way deep water pulses when something vast swims beneath it. They approached in silence. Leaf stepped forward first, his breath curling in the air. His eyes, wide and glassy, reflected the crown's glimmer. He reached out slowly, but the moment his fingers brushed its edge, a sound split the air, a chime, not sharp, but deep. Final. The kind of sound that meant no, the crown would not move. He tried again, nothing. Not resistance. Not weight. But a kind of stillness that refused to be disturbed. It's not made to be worn, Jules murmured. It's meant to be remembered. Etta circled it, observing the way the frost gathered thicker around its base. It's bound to something, she whispered. Or someone. Luca, quiet in the shadows, knelt near the dais. Or everyone. They stayed only a few minutes longer, but none dared to try again. Whatever that crown once ruled, it still ruled in silence. As they left, the frost around it thickened, slowly reclaiming it in layers of ice and time. And above them, one of the frozen stained glass windows cracked, just a hairline, as if something had watched. And turned away. They returned to the edge of the old shipwreck, the one half submerged in ice, with its mast like a skeletal arm reaching toward the pale sky. The place still held the hush of mystery, as if footsteps didn't quite echo and time moved sideways here, and then he appeared, not from the distance. Not from the mist, but simply there, standing silently near the broken prow, just as he had once before. A figure cloaked in centuries-old garments, fur-lined robes now stiff with frost, a thick belt of bone and leather hanging loosely at his side. He bore the same lantern, glowing with that familiar, quiet light. His face was calm. Serene. Eyes pale as glacial milk, but once again, no shadow followed him. No matter how the lantern swung or how the light fell, there was only the ice beneath his boots. Empty. Undisturbed, Etta stepped forward. You saw him before, she whispered to Luca. The boy nodded, but said nothing. The man lifted the lantern, not as a warning, but as an offering. The light inside pulsed, once, and a circle of warmth spread across the ice. Briefly, frost receded. For a moment, it looked like a hearth, then the glow dimmed, and the man pointed, not at them, but toward the horizon, toward the place where the glacier curved downward into deep, unknowable shadow. Follow? Jules whispered. Leaf nodded, eyes never leaving the figure, but when they looked again, the man was gone, no footprints, no trace, only the lantern's soft glow, still burning gently on the ice, as if waiting for someone to decide. They had begun to suspect that Frista obeyed no natural rules, but the room they found next confirmed it. Set deep within the base of a spiral tower, the chamber was sealed behind a crystalline door, thin as eggshell, yet cold enough to burn. Leaf traced its edge and whispered something in Old Norse. The door pulsed once and opened without a sound. Inside, a room untouched, books sat on wooden shelves, their leather bindings as supple as the day they were stitched. Bread, yes, bread, rested beneath a cloth on a table, still soft, faintly warm. A coat hung on a hook, free of mold or moths. A half-written letter lay waiting on a desk, the ink still wet. It's been preserved, Jules said softly. But not frozen. Etta touched the coat. It's not cold, she whispered. It's recent. Luca moved to the table, sniffed the bread, then stepped away. It smells like now. They explored the space in silence, reverent. This was not a ruin. It was a paused life. Whoever had lived here had left abruptly, or perhaps never left at all. Leaf lifted the letter. The language was unknown, yet the handwriting was gentle, almost loving. A farewell, he guessed, but why no decay? As they turned to leave, Luca lingered behind. He touched the desk once more, and the candle beside it flickered to life. He ran, the others followed, and behind them, the door closed on its own. sealing the moment as perfectly as it had been kept, as if Frista wasn't guarding a memory, but refusing to let it end. They found it in a narrow chamber, tucked between two collapsed walls near Frista's eastern quarter, a room half swallowed by frost, its entrance barely wide enough for Luca to squeeze through. Inside, it waited. A mirror, not large, not ornate. Its frame was forged from ice-laced brass, aged to a dull green shimmer, and its surface was not glass, but a sheet of something older. Liquid stillness. It pulsed faintly when they entered, though no light touched it. Etta stepped forward first. Her reflection appeared, but it wasn't her as she was, it was her, younger. Laughing. Her hair was longer. Her eyes softer. She stepped back, breath caught in her chest. Jules tried next. The mirror showed him older, hair silvered, lines deep around his mouth, but smiling, at peace, writing something beneath a tree that did not yet exist. Then came Leaf. His reflection didn't change at all. He frowned. Moved left, then right, still. Himself. It doesn't show us, he said quietly. It shows the moment we've buried. Luca approached. For a long time, he simply stared. The others couldn't see what he saw, but his face fell. His hands trembled. It's my village, he whispered. Before the fire. He turned away. No one asked to see more, and when they left the chamber, none dared look back. Later, long after the others had gone to sleep, Leaf returned alone. The mirror now showed only snow, falling forever in silence, as though time, once revealed, had decided to move on without them. It began with a gust of wind where no wind should have been. They were crossing a stretch of silent glacier, the kind where even their breathing felt too loud, when a single feather drifted down from the sky. It was pale, almost translucent, glinting with faint iridescence, not from any bird they could name. Luca reached for it. The feather touched his hand and passed through it, like mist. He blinked. The feather continued downward, brushing over the snow, but not stopping, sinking slowly, as though drawn into the ice itself. Etta knelt beside it, watching it vanish inch by inch into the surface. The ice is swallowing it, she murmured. Leaf knelt beside her, eyes distant. No, he said. It's remembering it. They cleared the snow around the spot, revealing a shallow depression, a basin of glass-smooth ice that pulsed faintly. Beneath it, just visible, were other feathers. Dozens. Hundreds. All frozen mid-fall, spiraling in perfect stillness. It's like a graveyard, Jules whispered. But for something. Weightless. There were no bones. No nests. Just feathers. Falling forever. Leaf placed a hand on the ice. It felt warm. Who buries flight? He asked softly. No one answered. They stood in silence, watching the last trace of the feather fade into the frozen depth, as though the glacier itself had once flown, once dreamed of skies, and had chosen to remember only the softness of what it lost. And as they turned to leave, Luca glanced upward, just once, wondering what else might be drifting down, slow and unseen, waiting to be remembered. It began with a hum, not a voice, not a wind, but a low resonance that vibrated in their boots, then their chests, then their very breath. It came from beneath, not deep, but near. As though something underfoot was singing. They were crossing a narrow bridge of blue ice when Luca stopped. It's in the ground, he whispered, tilting his head. His eyes unfocused, listening not with his ears, but with his bones. Etta crouched beside him, placing a gloved palm flat against the frozen bridge. The vibrations were gentle, rhythmic. Not random. Not mechanical, a melody. Leaf dropped to one knee, brushing away snow. The ice beneath was clear, clearer than any they'd seen. And below it, moving ever so slightly, were veins of color. Pale green. Deep violet. A pulse of silver. It was like watching a symphony etched into the glacier itself. Jules unwrapped a recording device, but the sound wouldn't carry. It wasn't airbound. It was inside the ice. Inside them, each note seemed tied to memory, not theirs, but something older. A lullaby that predated language. A rhythm born of moonlight and tide. Then the tone shifted, it grew deeper. Slower. Sadder. The bridge groaned. Time to go, Bram muttered. They moved quickly, the hum now louder behind them, as though the ice had awakened from a long dream and was singing it back to the sky. When they reached the far side, Luca turned once more, tears on his cheeks. It was singing goodbye, he said, and far below, the glacier continued its endless refrain, ancient, mournful, and terribly beautiful. They saw the glow before they felt the warmth. At first, they believed it to be a trick of the eye, a flicker beneath the ice, like sunlight refracted through snow. But as they followed the flicker down a winding tunnel lined with ancient frost, the glow sharpened. And the air grew warmer. They entered a cavern. It pulsed with amber light, and at its center was something none of them expected, a fire, but not one that crackled or danced. It hovered, suspended above the stone like a quiet heart. The flames were fluid and slow, turning upon themselves in a slow spiral. There was no smoke. No smell. No heat. Edda stepped closer. Her hand passed within inches of it. Nothing. I don't understand, she whispered. Leaf crouched nearby, running fingers along the strange black stone beneath. This isn't fire, he said. It's memory pretending to be fire. Around them, the walls shimmered, glowing with faint echoes. Shadows of people, frozen mid-motion. A woman laughing. A child clapping. A figure kneeling beside the flame flared, just once, and the cavern filled with a warmth that wasn't heat, but feeling. Home. Hope. A hearth long gone, then it dimmed again. Luca sat quietly, hands folded. It's a piece of someone, he said. The part that never wanted to forget warmth. They stayed a while longer, not speaking, not moving, basking in the fire that offered no heat. But so much more, and when they left, none looked back, but each carried the memory of warmth in their chest, as if the fire had lit something small. And lasting. It should have been just another corridor, a narrow path branching off from the city's eastern hall, where frost clung thick and silence stretched deep, but it wasn't. Edda entered first. The room beyond was round, lined with 7 alcoves. In the center, a pedestal. On it, a silver compass spun slowly in place. Even though there was no wind, no pull, the others followed. And froze. It's different, Jules said. He was right. The room had changed. Now there were 8 alcoves. The pedestal was taller. The compass was gone, replaced by a glass orb swirling with mist. Leaf stepped outside and back in again. Now the room held only 1 alcove. Inside it, a bed. On the bed lay a journal. Its cover read his name. Each time someone crossed the threshold, the room transformed, reshaping itself not at random, but intimately, as though the walls reached into their memories and pulled out the room they needed most. Bram saw the ocean, vast and stormy, viewed through a shattered window. Edda saw a mountain peak she had only climbed in dreams. Luca saw a room filled with stars, floating free in the air like lanterns. No two saw the same, and the room asked nothing in return. It simply waited, changed, and changed again. Leaf lingered longest. When he finally left, he said nothing about what he'd seen, but his hands trembled, and that night, while the others slept, he sat alone on the ship's deck, staring not at the stars, but at the dark spaces between them, as though the room had shown him something he had long buried, and could never unsee. They found it buried beneath a fallen tower, a great wheel of brass, its edges dusted with hoarfrost, half swallowed by time. It was a clock, though like none they had ever seen. Numbers etched in curling runes spiraled inward, and its single black hand ticked not forward, but back. Tick. 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 Each motion was deliberate. Reversed. As if the clock were not counting time forward, but pulling it slowly towards some forgotten beginning. Luca stared at it, mesmerized. It's unmaking time, Jules murmured. Like a river reversing its current. Edda placed her ear to the ice beneath it. A slow beat pulsed, steady as a heartbeat. Or a warning, Leaf stepped forward, brushing away frost from a smaller dial near the base. There were symbols he recognized, eclipses, phases of the moon, even the Old Norse calendar. But others made no sense. Spirals. Wings. A crown split in two, then, beneath the spinning hand, he saw something else, a reflection, not his, but of himself, younger. Standing on the dock in Bergen, maps in hand, full of fire, the reflection blinked, and smiled. He staggered back, the others said nothing. They too had seen their own younger selves, watching from within the brass. The ticking grew louder. Bram, uneasy, touched the rim of the wheel. "It's not a clock," he said. "It's a door. Or a mirror. Or both." But none knew where it led, and none dared stop it. They left it ticking backward. Slow and patient, counting down not to an end, but perhaps to a return. She was the first to look back. They found her beneath a glassy archway, far from Frista's heart, in a corridor half collapsed with snow and silence. Edda saw the glint first, not of treasure, but of something more delicate. Skin. She was entombed in the wall itself, not carved or buried, but fused into the ice. A girl, no older than 16, with hair like threads of midnight, eyes closed in stillness. One hand reached outward, her fingertips nearly breaking the frozen surface. Luca stepped forward slowly. "She's not dead," he whispered. It was impossible. She had been here for centuries, maybe longer. Yet her skin held color. Her expression was peaceful, not frozen in fear or pain. Leaf studied the runes along the wall surrounding her. They were unlike anything he'd seen, curved and looping like vines in wind. He traced one with a gloved finger. The girl's eyelids fluttered. Edda gasped. A ripple passed through the ice, not cracking, but pulsing, as though the glacier were breathing with her. "She's dreaming," Jules said. "And she's been dreaming for a very, very long time." They stayed, watching, afraid to speak. Then Luca reached into his coat and pressed something gently against the ice, a drawing of a crown, hovering above her outstretched hand, and for a heartbeat, her lips moved, not a word, just a whisper of breath against the wall, then stillness again. "She remembers," Luca said, and they left her there, not alone, but held in time, waiting for something not yet named. They never found her again. The corridor vanished the next day. They followed a corridor of ice veined with gold, thin strands glowing faintly as though lit from deep within the glacier itself. At the end, a domed chamber opened before them, round and tall, silent as a chapel long sealed. In its center stood a pedestal of obsidian, and resting atop it was a crown. It wasn't large. It wasn't adorned with jewels. But it shimmered with something more ancient than wealth, a strange, living metal that seemed to breathe faint steam into the cold air. No dust. No decay. Just waiting. Leaf stepped forward first. The others didn't move. "It was made for someone," he said softly, voice echoing off the walls. He raised a hand, not to touch, but simply to sense it. The crown pulsed once. A faint vibration in the floor. Not threatening. Not welcoming. It noticed him. Bram frowned. "Shouldn't we be more careful?" But Leaf wasn't listening. He had that look again, the one from the mirror, from the ice vault. From every moment something called to the part of him he never spoke of. He hovered his hand above it. Nothing happened. He placed both hands at his side. "It's not for me," he said. "It never was." Edda approached next. Then Jules. Then Luca. Each stood before it. Each was met with the same silence. The same refusal. "It's waiting," Luca finally said. "But not for us." They left the crown untouched. As they walked away, the gold veins along the corridor dimmed, just slightly, as if the glacier itself had drawn a breath and held it, patient, ancient, and ever watchful. It began with wind. Not the howling kind that scours skin raw, but a gentle draft, warm as breath, drifting down from somewhere far above. They found the source behind a wall of collapsed crystal, Edda and Bram clearing the way with picks and gloved hands until a narrow crevice widened into an open chamber. There, rising into darkness, was a staircase, not carved from ice, but from something smoother, pale stone laced with veins of faint blue. It spiraled upward without rails, without end, disappearing into a shaft of shadow that pulsed with soft light from above. It goes up, Jules murmured. But where? No one answered. Luca stepped onto the first stair. Nothing crumbled. No hum, no tremor. Just stillness. And invitation. One by one, they followed. As they climbed, the air changed. It grew warmer. Lighter. The silence became almost musical, as though distant chimes were echoing through the frost. Every 20 steps, they passed arched windows etched into the ice. Through them, glimpses of memory, floating ships, children laughing in languages they did not know, skies with 3 moons. It's not stairs, Leaf whispered. It's a passage through memory. After what felt like hours, the stairway opened onto a platform, a vast expanse overlooking a sky that did not belong to Earth. It shimmered with swirling stars, clouds that moved sideways, auroras painted with colors unnamed. They stood in awe, not speaking, not breathing, just watching. For a moment, the world below was forgotten, and the sky above was endless, ancient, and open, and then, far off in the stars, something blinked back. They descended from the sky platform slowly, minds still tethered to the impossible stars above. But something had shifted, not just in the air, but in the glacier itself. The wind had returned, but it was different. It came not in gusts, but in whispers, soft, swirling eddies that danced around them like curious ghosts. It did not bite with cold. It spoke. Luca was the first to notice. He's here, the boy said. Who? Etta asked gently. Luca didn't answer. He turned toward a narrow crevasse along the eastern wall, one they had passed before and thought empty. But now, a shape waited, a man, tall and cloaked in furs made of something that shimmered like snow dust. His eyes were covered by a thin veil, his skin the color of pale ash. He didn't walk toward them. He stood still, arms open slightly, as though greeting old friends, but no mouth moved when he spoke. Instead, the wind itself shifted, carrying his voice in tones that curled around their ears like breath in winter. You've come far, the wind said. But you do not belong to Frista. Leaf stepped forward. Who are you? I am memory, the wind replied. And warning. The man gestured to the glacier behind him, and for a heartbeat, the ice turned transparent. Beneath it, cities lost to time, frozen ships, and faces, hundreds of them, staring upward, unmoving. The glacier keeps what we forget. The wind said. But not all things wish to be remembered. Then the man bowed, and vanished into the air, unraveling like smoke into sky. Silence returned, but none of them felt alone anymore, not truly, not ever again. They saw its shadow before its shape, just beyond a narrow ice ridge, rising into a canyon of glassy cliffs. A vast shadow stretched across the snow, crisp and unmoving. It was too long for a bird, too straight for a cloud, and then they reached it, suspended several meters above the canyon floor, perfectly still and impossibly balanced, floated a ship, an old wooden vessel, masts intact, sails mid-billow, ropes caught mid-sway, as if time had caught it in the act of sailing through air and refused to let it finish, not hanging. Not tethered, floating. Leaf approached slowly, his eyes wide, whispering equations and theories that melted on his tongue. It's caught, he said. Between something. Maybe between moments. Etta tilted her head. Like the second before you wake from a dream. Jules, ever the skeptic, found no wires, no anchor, no trick. Just a ship, full-sized, real, hanging motionless above the glacier floor. Luca stepped beneath it and stared upward. She was going somewhere, he said quietly. But she forgot where. The name carved along the hull had worn away, replaced by frost. But as the wind shifted, a few letters became clear. EIRA, I knew that name, Leaf whispered. In the stories. She was the vessel of the lost. They did not attempt to board. No rope reached down. No path led up, instead, they stood in silence. Letting the sight carve itself into memory, and as they turned to leave, the wind stirred gently, the sails moved, just once, as if the ship remembered it had been sailing. And was still trying to. It was hidden beneath the city's lowest point, where the ice grew thick and blue as the deep sea. They hadn't meant to find it, they were simply following a soft vibration in the floor, like the slow thrum of a forgotten drum. Jules noticed it first, a faint resonance in the wall. Etta tapped it with the hilt of her blade, and it echoed strangely, like there was space behind it, but there was no seam. No hinges. No crack, just a wall. Leaf pressed his palm flat against the ice, and something responded. The wall shimmered, not melting, shifting. As though recognizing him. Slowly, almost reluctantly, the surface became translucent, revealing a chamber behind it, a vault. Inside were objects no one could name, globes filled with glowing fog, tools shaped for hands too long to be human, bones carved with runes and set inside jars of light. Scrolls with writing that moved when viewed sideways. A harp strung with what looked like silver strands of hair. And it was humming softly, though untouched. "This is older than Frista," Etta whispered. "Older than even the crown." "No one sealed it," Leaf said, eyes wide. "It sealed itself." And yet, as they stood there, the wall remained, a membrane between time and memory, between knowing and not. Luca didn't try to enter. He simply stood and drew, not the vault, but the wall itself, and in his drawing. The wall looked like an eye. Closed, as if sleeping, as if waiting for the right moment. To blink. By now, no one questioned Luca's drawings. He had filled a dozen pages since their arrival, images sketched in silence by firelight, sometimes in the middle of the night, eyes wide but distant. Each picture, eerie in its precision, revealed what had not yet come, a bell before it rang, a face before they saw it, a ship before it appeared in air. Jules once tried to explain it, said the boy's mind was simply tuned differently, like a compass spun toward memory instead of north. But Leaf suspected something deeper. One evening, as the glacier moaned low and long in the distance, Luca sat alone by the library chamber and drew with charcoal. When Etta knelt beside him, she gasped. He had drawn them, the entire crew, standing at a shoreline that did not exist. A shore made not of sand, but of glass. And in the sky above, a great circle. Cracked down the center like a broken mirror. "What is this place?" she whispered. Luca didn't look up. "It's where we go next." He turned the page, another sketch, this time of himself. Older. Standing in a field of frost flowers, beside a tall man with no face, holding the same worn notebook in his hands. "But how do you know?" Luca blinked, quietly. "I remember it." He drew not from imagination, but from what already lived inside him, things not yet happened, but waiting, and in that moment, Leaf understood. The boy hadn't stumbled onto their ship by accident, he had returned. They came upon it just past dusk, a clearing surrounded by twisted pillars of ice, bent like the ribs of some great fossilized beast. In its center was a perfect ring carved into the glacier's floor, etched deeply with ancient runes and symbols they could not read. The circle pulsed faintly, not with heat or sound, but with memory. Etta ran her fingers over the edges. "It's not decorative," she said. "It's mechanical." But there were no gears. No tools. Just symbols, concentric, seamless, eternal. Leaf crouched low and studied the innermost ring, and then he froze. Each symbol matched one from Luca's earliest drawings, the ones he made before they reached the glacier. The same odd crown, the same spires, the same line that split clean down the center. "It's a memory trap," Leaf whispered. "Or a lock." Luca stepped into the circle, the glacier groaned, wind stirred, and suddenly the ground beneath them shimmered, not breaking, not falling, but revealing. A dome of stars spun above them where ice had once been. They stood now in a sky that wasn't sky, surrounded by themselves in echo, reflections made of light and thought. Then, the circle cracked, a single break down the middle. Clean. Final, the stars vanished. They stood in silence, surrounded once more by cold ice and quiet wind. Bram exhaled. We broke something. Leaf shook his head. No. It broke itself. We only watched. The ring had ended something, or begun it, and beneath the cracked floor, where no one looked, the faintest flicker of blue light blinked once, and then again. The warmth came first, not from the sun, nor flame, but from within the ice itself. They were nearing the farthest edge of the city, where the glacier sloped into a forgotten ravine. It was there that they found him, half buried in snow, slumped against a stone pillar carved with swirling runes, lay a man, not frozen, not breathing, but warm. The soft amber light pulsed faintly through the open front of his coat, like a lantern left burning behind ribs. His chest glowed with rhythm, a heartbeat of embers. Jules knelt cautiously, placing 2 fingers near the man's neck. No pulse, he said. And yet. The man's eyes fluttered, just once. Etta leaned closer, whispering. Who are you? The man didn't speak, but a shape flickered in the snow beside him, a perfect spiral of heat, melting the frost in gentle rings. Luca, wide-eyed, stepped forward and whispered, he carries the last fire. Leaf nodded slowly. He's the keeper. They did not wake him, they did not move him. Instead, they built a ring of stones around his resting place, and left a small mirror facing the sky, so that light, should it ever return, would fall first upon his face. And as they turned to leave, the light in his chest flickered once more, not fading, but waiting, like a coal in winter, like memory kept in a hidden place. It began with a vibration. Barely perceptible, like the hum of a distant cello echoing through frozen stone. They were deep in the glacier now, beneath Frista's forgotten chambers, where the walls grew darker and the frost took on strange hues of violet and green. No torches were needed, the ice itself glowed faintly, as though remembering a light it once held. Then the whisper began, not a sound, exactly. Not wind or voice, a thought. It slid across their minds like a feather in fog, a presence not heard but felt. Gentle. Curious. Endless. Luca froze mid-step, his eyes wide. He clutched his notebook to his chest and looked down. Beneath his boots, thin cracks had begun to form, spiderwebbing outward in luminous strands. The ice is speaking, he said. Etta crouched, pressing her ear to the ground. At first, nothing, then. A sigh. Long and low, like something exhaling from centuries ago. What does it say? Jules whispered. No one knew. The whisper was not in any language they recognized. It was emotion, memory, longing. A library made of thought. A cathedral of forgotten names, and at the very center of the sound was a question, unspoken, unanswered. Leaf stood, his breath slow and misting. It's asking who we are. But none dared reply. Instead, they placed their palms flat upon the ice. The whisper quieted, not gone, but satisfied, and beneath their fingers, they felt it, not just ice. Not just silence, but a mind, old, watching, and awake. It rested on a pedestal of black stone, in a chamber that had no doors. They had stumbled upon it by accident, or perhaps, as Leaf suspected, it had allowed itself to be found. A tunnel of soft, downward-sloping ice led them into a perfectly round room, smooth as polished obsidian, and in the center, beneath a shaft of pale, unnatural light, was the crown, only. It wasn't truly there, it cast no shadow. Reflected no flame. It shimmered faintly, like the air above fire, a suggestion of shape. Not gold. Not silver. Not even crystal. Just presence. It's made of nothing, Jules whispered. Luca shook his head. No. It's made of everything that was forgotten. The closer they came, the heavier the silence became, pressing in around them like deep ocean water. Etta stopped just shy of the pedestal, her hand hovering in the air. It's waiting for someone, she said. But it isn't us. Leaf nodded. This is what Frista was built around. This is its heart. The crown pulsed once, like a breath drawn in. And each of them saw something, not with their eyes, but inside their minds, a vision of themselves, older, smaller, infinite. standing alone in snow, holding the crown. And choosing not to wear it, Luca blinked. "That's the test," he said softly, and as they turned to leave, the crown did not vanish, it simply dimmed, as if satisfied, as if the right hands had come and passed by. The wind had changed, it no longer howled, it whispered softly. As if satisfied, they stood at the city's edge once more, Frista's towers now bathed in a strange stillness. The glow from its spires had faded to silver. The air, once sharp and crackling with mystery, felt warm and final. Luca sat on a frozen step, his sketchbook full. Pages fluttered in the wind like tired wings. One final drawing remained, a door, gently closing. "It's going to sleep," he said. Leaf nodded, eyes misted with something too old to name. It was never lost. It was waiting. They didn't speak much on the return. The SS Njord groaned gently as it turned south, the last outline of Frista fading into the mist behind them. No one tried to mark it on a map. No one tried to tell the world some truths. "Prefer quiet," Jules wrote no article. Etta packed her notes and said nothing. Bram lit a final pipe and stared into the sea. And Luca, he simply drew the stars. On the final night, as the ship passed into warmer water, a soft hum echoed from the glacier behind them. Just once. Like the closing of a music box, and in that sound, they understood, Frista was not a ruin, not a kingdom lost, it was a choice, a mind of ice and memory, keeping its secrets safe, not from the world, but for it, sleeping, not buried, remembering, not gone, and beneath that endless northern sky, the crew slept, not with fear or wonder, but with peace. Because they had seen it, and they had been seen in return. Another whisper from the past, now fading into the night. Thanks for listening. Subscribe for more sleepy stories from history. And until next time,